And welcome on into the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. As always, he is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. Exciting time on the pod, George. We knew the opponents, but now we finally know the order. The 2024 schedule for the Colts has been released on Wednesday night. We're here to break it down for you, give you our win-loss record as well, and kind of break down some of our favorite games, the most important games on the Colts schedule. We'll obviously also discuss yet again the lack of primetime opportunities, at least right now. We saw last year that changed. I expect it to change again this year as well later in the season. We'll break that down as well. We got a lot coming here, George. But as we said, George, schedule is out. Let's go. Win-loss record, how are we feeling so far?
It's a tough one. I went over it this morning because I always feel like, however I look at the schedule now, by the time we get to December, I feel completely differently. Like all of a sudden the hard games were easy and the easy games were hard. And there's some team on there right now that's going to completely exceed all expectations. And there's some team on there right now that's going to flop. So with all that in mind, I had 11-6 right now. I think I'm a little on the high side. But I also had them starting 0-2. So I think that was, we know they're going to go 0-1. That's as much a free space as losing in Jacksonville. So, I mean, if you only lose 4 out of the guaranteed losses on the schedule, you only lose 4 more. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good run.
I am scared because you said 11-6. My record, George, 11-6.
So
We did
four and
not
12
talk about this
four and
before the
13
pod. We both did. Yeah, exactly right. Last year we nailed our prediction. I think I said 5-12, and I think you said 4-13, or maybe flip-flopped, but
Yeah.
we were saying very low. And obviously the Colts blew that out of the water big time. They were going 9-8. So I hope we're not the jinx here this year where we're saying 11-6 and we're talking about, a 5-12 season here. But I want to kind of break it down because I do think like when you kind of, if we like take the schedule in chunks, which I think is maybe the easiest way to kind of break down our logic here. To me, 11-6 absolutely should be the standard for this team this year. Like you said, week one, we know there are 2 horrors for this team right now the last decade, in Jacksonville and week one. If you look at the first 5 games, George, home against the Texans week 1, at the Packers week 2, home against the Bears week 3, home against the Steelers week 4, and then one of the free spaces week 5 at Jacksonville. We can mix and match here, but I feel very confident saying the Colts will go 3-2 in that 5-game stretch. I know you said they're going to go 0-2. How do you feel about that?
I've got them 2-3 right there, but I do
Okay.
think it's a huge spot because, for one thing, that's the only back-to-back home games they play all year is weeks 3 and 4. So you play the
Good
Bears and
catch.
Pittsburgh back-to-back, and that's it. They've got 3 times where they play back-to-back road games, but only 2 of them are consecutive weeks. They can play, and those 2 come right after that stretch. They have 3 of the first 4 at home, and then it's like 4 of the next 5 on the road. They also play back-to-back road games on either side of the bye, which is a little bit different than actually playing them in back-to-back weeks.
True.
But that's a lot. And, that happens. This is the year, as long as we have the unbalanced schedule, until the NFL goes to 18, which is obviously going to happen despite all logic telling you not to do it. Until then, you've got that every other year. You have an extra road game or you have an extra home game. So they got the 9 road games this year. So it was always going to be a little bit more challenging that way. But I think the middle of the schedule right now is rough because if I'm correct, trying to remember from last night, like 3 of their first 4 at home and then 6 of their next 9 going into the bye on the road. That's going to be that 6 out of 9 on the road to me is going to be the stretch that determines the season.
At Jacksonville week 5, at Tennessee week 6, home against the Dolphins. Then it's at Houston, at Minnesota, back home against the Bills, at the Jets, Lions at home, at the Patriots, bye week, at the Broncos. It's a big stretch of road games there. But also I will say, like, it's manageable in that sense of just like Jacksonville, again, put that out. They don't win there. Tennessee, like, and the Colts have showed you they can win in Tennessee. And it's still, I think the Titans are clearly the 4th team in this division. Yes, road game in the division is very tough. But I would say in terms of that, very, very, very manageable. The Texans on the road, the Colts won there last year with Anthony Richardson missing half the year. Again, I would say we've talked about this on previous pods. The Texans, I would say right now, deserve to be the front runner to win the division. But like when you look at the Texans, Colts, and Jaguars, I really don't think there's a lot separating them. And so, like, if you look at the two Houston games, weeks 1 and week 8, like, I feel confident, even though the first one's at home and the Colts never win week 1, I do feel confident in saying, like, that they can win that game. Like, that's like, I think I feel good in saying they're going to split with the Texans this year. Are you saying, because I know you have them losing week 1, do you see the Texans getting a sweep this year, or do you see a split?
I think I have the Texans with the sweep because
Okay.
of the week one. Week one's one of those things where like it's same as Jacksonville. I'm not gonna pick them to win week one until they do it. Like it's too long of a curse that until they prove that they can do it, I have to just kind of go that way and say no, it's not gonna happen. But I do think one thing about this schedule that I think stood out to me, I feel like some of the harder games are at home. The road schedule, as far as like look again, with the caveat I said at the top of the show, right now, basing off of last year's results, some of the road schedule has the easier games on paper, for the most part, and the tougher teams are here. Like the Miami game is here, the Buffalo game is here. You know, I think those are things. The
The
Detroit game is here.
Lions.
Exactly. So like those things I think are, that should work in your favor. But it can go both ways too, because we've seen the Colts not defend home turf as well as they need to recently. And that's part of it. As much as we talk about reasons they didn't make the playoffs last year, starting quarterback getting hurt obviously is a big one on that. But I think one of the underrated ones that we don't talk enough about is that home record. I think they were 4-5 at home, and they lost like their first three or three of their first four or something like that. That can't happen again. You do that again, you're probably going to be home again. They played well enough on the road last year and got enough done there, but at home they didn't take care of business. And I think even with a tough schedule, they've got to find a way to at least be 5-3 at home, and 6-2 or 7-1 would be a much better outing. But it is a tough home schedule.
No, it is. But like you said, like at least you give yourself a chance here. Like the Lions, I would say right now, the best team on their schedule. You give yourself a chance by being at home later in the year. So hopefully, the rust and development Anthony Richardson has to make up for missing 95% of last year. By that point is off and you're ready to go. AD Mitchell, Latu are like, now in the swing of things, like at least in terms of when you play them, I feel like they're probably, I have that as a loss anyway, right? I mean, again, you're playing you could argue maybe the best team in the NFC. If not, they're one of the elite teams in the NFL, period. You're probably not winning that game anyway. But I definitely think, George, they have a better chance of winning that when it's on the schedule at week 12 versus week 2. Like I think later on in the year, playing the Dolphins in week 7, the Bills in week 10, the Lions at week 12, not only are those 3 games home, and you could make an argument 3 of the toughest games on their schedule, period, but it's also they're spread out enough where it's not back to back, and they're middle to later in the year where you do give yourself the opportunity to kind of round into form. We saw the Colts, I know, again, a lot of extenuating circumstances last year, but really start to kind of round into form in the middle of the year and kind of get clicking and play better down the stretch. If they replicate that and hopefully at a quicker pace than last year, you should be playing some of your best football when the Bills come to town, when the Lions come to town, which is huge. Again, I don't know if they may not win either of those games, but at least you give yourself a better chance here going forward. And one of the things we kind of talked about a lot in, again, another bugaboo last year's, right, with another slow start. They were 3-5 right before the bye, before they kind of caught up and were at 500 after that Patriots game, but another slow start to the year. And you look at, again, you have them starting 0-2, tough start to the year, home against the Texans, at the Packers. If you can, this to me, we'll get to the back end of the schedule here in a second. This to me, if you can tread water, just tread water the first half of the year, you will really set up here to make a big time run in the second half. And part of the reason why I have them going 11-6, George, is at least through the first 5 games, or excuse me, the first 10 games, I have them 5-5. First 12 games, 6-6. If you can tread water and just keep your head above, just stay afloat until really that Detroit game in week 12, you are, the end of the schedule, George. Week 13 at the Patriots, probably going to be one of the worst teams in the league. Week 14 bye, which by the way, like last year, I do like the late season bye. I think I'd rather have a late year bye than an early bye, like week 5. Week 14, rest up. Then it's the home stretch here at the Broncos, not very good. One of the lowest over/under totals in the NFL. Home against the Titans, at the Giants, home against the Jaguars. That's very like, I mean, that's what, 5 games? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 games down the stretch. Bare minimum. That should be a 4-1 stretch. I'm going 5-0. Like that, if this team is going to be as good as we think they are on paper, that should be a 5-0 stretch.
Yeah, getting that kick down the stretch. I had them at 7-5 through 12 and 4-1 down that stretch. So both of us have them, really gaining a lot of ground in that after the bye, which is going to have to happen. I mean, I think that's critical part of this. Those are the two most important stretches to me, as far as like not individual games, but like, actual stretches of the schedule. That right before the bye, the 6-9 game, 6 of 9 on the road, where you, like you said, you got to tread water there. And then coming out of the bye, having 3 home games in that stretch, and it being more of a, I don't want to say easy, but on paper, that's definitely the weakest point in the schedule when you're trying to fight for playoff position, when you're trying to fight for playoff slots. I think that's always one of the big things. You look in December and everybody's starting to, there's 5 teams here. Like if we're right and they're 6-6 or they're 7-5, they're somewhere in that range, they're going to be right in the heart of the wild card race. I mean,
Right.
you see that every year. And so I think at that point, that schedule could be critical, because that's where you're always talking about, well, who do they play this week? Well, the Colts have the Giants. Well, Cincinnati or whoever may be in that race with them, they're at Pittsburgh or they're at Baltimore, or it's a different kind of an opponent. So I think that's going to be, that kick is probably the best thing for the Colts on this, that you get the bye right before it. So you're going to re-energize. You hope to have everybody you can have back, for that finishing stretch. And then you've got some winnable games that you have to win. I think that's going to be the big key there. The way this schedule sets up, they can't lose to someone they shouldn't lose to. I think there's enough 50-50 games on here that you can't lose. You can't blow one of the, expected wins on this schedule.
Agreed, right? You can't drop a game to the Broncos. I know it's in Denver, which is tougher, mile high, but still, like, win that game. Giants, win that game. And to your point, like down the stretch, week 17 at the Giants, right? The Colts' last road game of the year. Just for reference, because I was looking at this before, the Texans, that same week, Christmas Day, Ravens at the Texans. So just to kind of highlight, like, that is a brutal game for Houston, facing one of the best teams in the league at home on Christmas Day, which I think is a Wednesday. So it's going to be one of those wonky, like, short weeks for them too. So you got a short week playing a great opponent at home, where the Colts are on the road playing the Giants. Like, that's one, to your point, like, if you're going to be a playoff team, you take care of business, no questions asked. Like, especially when you see, by the way, do you see those Giants new uniforms they revealed on Thursday?
I just saw that before we got
Yuck.
started here. What is that? I was going to ask you, because you're a New York guy. How do you put that out in New York and not get like mugged?
That is disgusting. Where it's basically, if you haven't seen them yet, I mean, honestly, don't look for them. Your eyes are gonna just
Yeah,
fall
don't
out of
do
your
it.
head. But
Don't do
if
it.
you want to torture yourself, it's the Michigan winged helmet with like red wings. I mean, I don't even know how to describe the jersey itself. Like, the best thing I
It's
could say,
a
it looks like
Christmas
it's the
sweater.
CFL. Yeah, Christmas sweater mixed with the CFL mixed with like the Montreal Canadiens is maybe the best way to
Yeah,
put it.
that's a pretty
With like
good. Yeah.
tan pants. It like, this is, if I didn't know better, George, and the Giants wore these, or I should say wear these, when they play the Colts. The Montreal Alouettes. I would have confused the
Yeah,
Colts for playing in the wrong league. Like, they're in the CFL.
it was pretty bad. Do they only get away with this because they're actually in New Jersey? Like, could you actually put that out if you were in the city?
Good point. The bridge is going to keep a lot of people away from going to that stadium and protesting those disgusting uniforms. So to answer your question, no, if they're playing in like MSG, I don't think you could wear those. Absolutely not. Just an
Oh,
atrocity.
horrendous.
So
Yeah,
you can't. If you're the Colts, you can't lose that game in general because the Giants suck. If they wear those jerseys, George, that's like a double L if you lose. Pack up the season. It's over. It's
yeah,
over. So
there's no
it's
question. If they lose to those jerseys, I think whoever they play, if the Giants win that week, the opponent's out of the playoffs, right? That's got to be the rule.
relegate them. Well, I'm not
Absolutely.
send them to the, what is it? The UFL is going on right now, the
Yep.
spring league. Send them there.
Down to the
Like,
UFL.
sorry, you lose to this, like, you lose to a bad team that looks bad. You got no business in our league, buddy.
That would be a bad UFL jersey, by the way. That
Yes.
uniform set, yeah, don't do it. That's my advice to everybody. If you haven't seen it yet, spare your eyes. Don't do it.
The last thing I'll say about that, if you are a big fan of the pod, you know this. But if you joined us recently, welcome. Number one, thank you for making us part of your rotation here. But number two, going back to the Indiana Knights uniforms, George,
Mhm.
those were I hated those. I absolutely despised them. Those Giants jerseys are so bad. I actually appreciate the Indiana Knights jerseys and uniforms way more than I did when they were put out there last year. Let's just say that. That's how bad these Giants jerseys are. God,
Agreed.
my goodness. So I'm with you. End of the season, you got to take care of business. The last 5 games, bare minimum 4-1. That's the worst you can go down the stretch. I think it's also important when you talk about like key stretches of the season. I think also you look at the 3 games that again spread out: week 7, week 10, week 12. Home against the Dolphins, home against the Bills, home against the Lions. Bare minimum, George. I would sign up for this, but you got to go 1-2. You got to win one of those 3 games. Again, I think you can have a losing record and still afford to get to the 11 wins we're talking about, but you can't go 0-3 there. You got to, especially on your home field. I'll accept taking or losing 2 out of the 3. Got to win at least one.
And I think they match up well with Buffalo. I mean, they have recently. You go
Last
back
time.
to even the 2020 season, they were in the playoff game and should have won that game.
Yeah.
Didn't finish it, very similar to the Texans game at the end of the year last year in a lot of ways. And then obviously last time they played in the regular season, Jonathan Taylor had a Pro Bowl season in that game. So we'll see, where this goes, but they have matched up well with Buffalo. So I feel like that's the one of those 3 that you feel the best about. The Dolphins, it's hard to say. If they have a winning record going into the game, then you like their chances against Miami based on what happened last year for the Dolphins. But that one, there's a lot of matchup issues there that concern you. I mean, this young secondary is going to grow up fast in that one. And then Detroit, like you said, very possibly and probably the best team on the schedule, which traditionally the Colts win that game. No matter who else they lose to, they beat the best team on the schedule, and then they'll also somehow lose to one of the worst teams on the schedule. But that's going to be those 3 games, and I think they're the 3 home games in that stretch when there's 6 road games in 9. So it puts even more emphasis on them because when you're playing so many road games, you got to take care of business at home, and they're going to be really, really strong playoff caliber opponents.
You're 100% right. Yeah, I like your point about the Dolphins. That is funny. They can't beat a winning team. 1-6 last year in the 7 playoff teams they played. No wins on the road as well, so that should bode well for the Colts. Although it's going to be a problem. That should be Jim. I know you're listening. This is right now. I know you love doing the weather updates and the roof updates. I don't care. I hope it's honestly. I hope we get a blizzard or a monsoon, whatever it is. On what we get the exact date here. It is October 20th. Whatever the weather is that day, open the roof. Pray for rain, pray for wind, pray for snow. A snowstorm in mid October would be tremendous. Open that roof and just put the Dolphins in hell. Don't give them the climate controlled 70-degree weather and the fast turf.
You never have any idea what the weather's going to be in October in Indiana. I can give you that right now. So snowstorm is possible. It's also possible it's 80. So you just have no clue. Every year on Halloween is like flip a coin because it can be really nice and it can be freezing and every point in between.
Yeah, if it's 80 degrees, close the roof, right? Please, we can't have the Colts, suffering heat stroke on the sidelines. The Dolphins are used to it. Let me ask you this, George. Favorite game on the schedule? It doesn't have to be the most important, but just the one maybe you're looking forward to the most, the one that you think could be the most exciting.
I'm going to cheat and put 2 here because
Oh, okay.
that's how I cheat. Like from a personal level, it's Green Bay, just because going to
Okay.
Lambeau is always really fun, and you only get to do that 1 out of every 8 years. Now, there's a little chance that it could happen more often as long as the 17 game schedule is in place because you've got that extra game against the opponent you don't know. But it's not great odds that one's Green Bay and it's a year that it's on the road. But just that stadium, the history up there, I've only been there once as long as I've been covering this team. So going up there again, that I think is fun. That has nothing to do with the game on the field. That's just,
Hey, that counts. That's favorite game. That everything counts.
so from that standpoint, that's my favorite game. But I think from like the on field, it's back to Miami. I think that's the one that could be the Arena League score. Like that's the game that could be 55-45 because it's very possible both offenses really get going. I think the Colts are going to have a top flight offense this year. I think that's one thing. If you're predicting 11 wins, I think that's one of the things that you're kind of building it on the back of. So I just feel like that game could be one. I go back to when Goff and Mahomes were on Monday Night Football against each other, and they were really young, both quarterbacks, and you just had that shootout, and it got everybody excited about both the Rams and the Chiefs. I think this could be that game for this era of Indy. That you could have Tua and AR out there, and it becomes a shootout. You know, Cheetah might have 200 yards in that one, but the Colts might match that with their receiving core between Pittman and Mitchell and Downs and Pierce. So, and you know, you would figure that's a game that you want to take advantage of Jonathan Taylor. So, if AR's healthy, which is that's just we're not even saying that a lot because that's a caveat for everything this year. But if he's healthy, I think that game could. I just feel like that could be the old. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the old whack games that would be on ESPN at like 10 o'clock at night, the Western Athletic Conference, and they would have these
Oh,
shoot
did that
all
precede
the time.
Pac-12 After Dark?
It was like the 90s
Oh,
version of Pac-12 After Dark, and it would be these two, San Jose State and like whoever they're playing, and it would just be this Hawaii was always one of those really massively offensive teams, and I can see that kind of result with the Dolphins and the Colts, which means it'll be a 6-3 game. But right now, I just feel like that one has the potential to have high entertainment value and be one of those games that gets people outside the market talking about this team.
be like the when we predicted the predicted the Browns Colts game to have
Mhm.
basically one offensive touchdown combined, and it was what 39-38. Yeah, we're all sitting here
Exactly.
saying 45-40. The last one with the ball wins.
Yep. Field goal
10-7.
fest.
Holy cow. Yeah, Matt Gay, get your leg warmed up. That's for sure. I like those two are really good. And I think you're right, by the way, when it comes to Green Bay, like it's all like this is now the time where we start to plan trips. I feel pretty certain in saying the biggest in terms of Colts fandom going on the road, the biggest collection of Colts fans you'll see is that week 2 game in Green Bay. Like a historic place. You're not there very often. Early in the year, which is huge. So you don't have to worry about freezing your what off. You can sit there comfortably,
Mhm.
enjoy the city, enjoy everything around it as well. Yeah, I think you'll be a lot of blue in Green Bay is my guess for sure. Week 2, I'm actually going to go 1 week later than the Green Bay game. I'm most excited for week 3 Bears coming to town. I'm a
Mhm.
I'm a big believer in Caleb Williams. I think he's going to, I think he's going to hit right away. I think to me, George, the Bears are a playoff team this year. I think they are really good. I like the talent that they have. And that could be one of those games too. Close proximity, right? Indy and Chicago. So kind of like
Mhm.
a little bit of a, if you want to say regional rivalry. That should kind of get the fans going. But also too, like two young teams with explosive offenses on paper that I think we could see too, a really fun back and forth game. Obviously, Matt Eberflus making his much anticipated return to Indy with a new look, by the way. Have you seen how Matt Eberflus looks these days with the beard and the hair?
Yeah, Chicago ages you. I mean, I would just say, well, you're the Bears head coach. It's one of those things. It's like the presidency, when you look at when they take over, and then 4 years later, when their term ends, they somehow like aged a decade in that time frame. I think that's Bears head coach the same thing.
Oh no. Oh, George, you got to look him up. It's the opposite. He's
What?
gone
Well,
back.
maybe Caleb Williams.
He his
Maybe drafting Caleb Williams.
I don't know who got to him. Someone got to him. He looks like Mr. GQ now. He got
I
the
don't know.
coif. He's got like the parted hair. The beard is all tight and trimmed. I don't know if now being in the NFC North, because I saw he was at I think it was a Marquette game maybe over the offseason. He was sitting next to Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur is pretty well known for getting his eyebrows done. He's always about his appearance and making sure
Yeah.
everything facially is like acceptable for TV. I don't know if he got into Eberflus. Someone did. It may have been Caleb Williams as well. I didn't see him painting his nails, but hey, I didn't look that close. Maybe he did. I promise you, George, if you don't look at a picture of Matt Eberflus now between now and week 3, and you're on the sideline before the game, I promise you, you will not recognize him.
I won't know who it is.
You will not know who it
Uh,
is.
I mean, maybe it's just you get a quarterback from LA, and you got to get it that Hollywood mentality.
Got to convince the Bears are cool. So I'm
I
going to just
mean, they
redo
could
my
be.
look.
They could. Now that's the Bears game and the Steelers game. The thing about those being back-to-back home games, is that generally those are two fan bases that come and take over Lucas Oil Stadium. You have a big chunk of visiting fans those weeks. So that's not ideal with those being the only back-to-back home games either. So let's put the early caveat out there. Don't sell your tickets, fans.
Hey, look, going back to last year, right? We talked about that Steelers game. Go to the game. Don't let the Steelers fans take over. The Colts fans did a pretty good job of showing out. Steelers fans are going to get in anywhere they go.
They
But I
do.
thought in terms of a takeover, like that was a really good home field advantage. Now, obviously, the Colts fed off of, and that's with Gardner Minshew a quarterback. Now, with Anthony Richardson coming in, anticipation should be high early on in the season, especially too if you're able to get off to a 1-1 start, either beat the Texans or go on the road and beat an up and coming team in the Packers that a lot of people are high on after their playoff run last year. Like momentum should be high going to week 3 and also week 4. So
Mhm.
I'm with you. Don't sell the tickets. Get there. Make it a fun environment because those two games, especially, I think, will be a lot of fun. Especially with Russell Wilson coming to town. That'll be interesting for sure. How about this, George? We talked about the favorite game of the schedule. What about the most important? Like, is there a game you circle that says this could really kind of determine where this Colts season goes, either good or bad?
I feel like week 8 at Houston is really, really important. One thing, this is one of those years, and it seems like it's happened a lot recently. 4 of their 6 division games are before Halloween. So you've only got 2 down the stretch. They're both home games, and they're in the final 3 weeks, I think, of the season. So they're going to be critical when they roll around. But all those tiebreakers that you start thinking about in terms of winning the division are going to come down to that game at Houston. And for whatever reason, the Colts have played better in Houston than they have in Indy recently. So if you can take care of business in week 1, if you can get that monkey off your back, which again I'm not predicting will happen until it does, if you can go down to Houston and get that sweep, that could be tremendous for your chances of winning a tie. What give you the tie-breaking edge? If you need that game to get the split, obviously going down 2-0 to them pretty much takes you out of the division race. It doesn't guarantee it, but now you've got to win outright. You cannot
Right.
finish even with them. So, that game to me is just so important in terms of winning the division, which is this team's stated goal. I mean, Zaire Franklin said it back in April. That they were so close last year that the only way up from here is to go and actually get the job done within the division. So those Jacksonville games are important as well. But I think it's too easy to say week 18 against the Jaguars, which could end up just like last year. It wouldn't be a complete shocker if that game is, the Saturday night game with the AFC South on the line for the 3rd year in a row. It was Titans and Jaguars 2 years
Yeah.
ago, Texans and the Colts last year. It wouldn't be completely shocking if it happened again. But that Houston game to me, it's right in the middle of the year. It's at that point you were talking about earlier where the Colts seem to start clicking. At least they did a year ago. They start rolling their way. And it could really, you're not going to see the Texans the rest of the year after that. So, and you've only got 2 division games, period, after that. It just feels like one of those games with a lot more riding on it than a week 8 game normally would.
I'm glad you brought that one up because I wrote down 2 games. That was one of them. Because you're right. Like, I don't think it could sneak under the radar because where it is in the schedule, week 8. I'm with you. I don't think it's too early to put circle that game as one of the most important games of the year because if you're able to win that game, bare minimum, you would assume, okay, you at least got a split. You go 2-0 against the Texans now. Even in week 8, you are cementing yourself as we're the team to beat in this division. And that's a massive statement for this team to make if you can go into Houston and beat CJ Stroud and all the talent that they got after this big time off season, too, by the way, where a lot of people are high on the Texans. You go into Houston week 8, that's a statement, George. I'm really glad you picked that game because, like you said, I think it's easy to maybe skip over it because where it is in the schedule, week 8, never too important to kind of circle that game. The other one I circled here that I'm going to discuss is week 10, the Bills. We kind of talked
Mhm.
about it before, right? That big 3-game stretch at home, Dolphins, Bills, Lions. You said it before, and I agree with you. Of those 3 teams, the Colts match out the best with the Bills. And so that is, I think, by far the most winnable in the terms of just talent. I mean, I think the Bills got worse this offseason, not better. So you're making Josh Allen's life a lot harder. And that game is so important because if you do lose the Dolphins game in a shootout and just that offense is just unstoppable and the rookie, or younger secondary still is struggling against some elite receivers, okay, what are you going to do? That is a game where you can't go into that Lions game with having it almost be a must win. Because then I mean, you're really behind the eight ball. Like you said, the Colts have a propensity, whatever it may be, to win the hardest game on the schedule, feels like every single year. But that is a really tall task, even at home, to try to beat this Lions team that, again, is on the short list of Super Bowl contenders in the NFL. You win that Bills game, you buy yourself the luxury of, if we lose the Lions game, okay, no problem. Like, we kind of talked about it last year, right? Like, take down the stretch, take care of business. Don't make it harder on yourself than it has to be. Beat the Bills, take care of business there. And then again, if you lose that Lions game, it's really no sweat with how the schedule breaks out. But if you lose that Bills game, now you say, oh, well, we really need now that, that Lions game in order to win. And you put yourself in a bad spot and you go 0-3 against these three teams. We're talking about then 10-7, maybe 9-8 if they lose another game that is, they shouldn't lose. And all of a sudden, George, like Bert, I don't think it's hyperbolic to say like that Bills game could be like the one game that determines if this Colts team's a playoff team or not.
It really could. I mean, it's one of those pivot games where you got to have it, and it's at home. And like you said, the Bills aren't what they were before. They do have like 36 new receivers. I think they just keep signing a new one every day. But by then, you would think the chemistry is starting to come along between them and Josh Allen. So it should be, a really big game. Another one you would think, if both teams are at least somewhat taking care of business, they're at least in that 500 range, and in the graphic that they're doing for the playoffs, that'll be a game with a lot of attention again, because you've got Josh Allen against the quarterback he's probably most compared to, or with AR. So I think that will be a really big national matchup where people will kind of sink their teeth into that game, and it comes at a really, really important juncture in the season. I mean, that stretch right there in the middle, you just have so many big games, whether it's the home game, the three home games you've been talking about. They've got their House of Horrors during that stretch in Jacksonville. They've got a huge game in Houston. Like, it just feels like there's so many games in that stretch that you could point to it at the end of the year and say that's why they got in or why they didn't. But the Buffalo one, being at home, being a team you typically match up pretty well against, is, yeah, that to me, it's only May, but if you're going to circle one game right now as a must win, that might be the one.
And like you said before, too, tiebreakers, like the Bills, even despite the talent exodus in Buffalo, and I think overall they got worse compared to last year, I think they're still a playoff team, in my opinion. So like that could be a team if the Dolphins put it together and take a step this year compared to last year and they win the division, kind of like what we saw with, now that didn't work out because Cincinnati kind of faded as well. But like when we were talking about that Cincinnati game last year, was a week 15 or whatever, like big implications in terms of tiebreaker like that. That could be one of those Bills games where you look back in week 15, week 16 of just like, wow, thank God the Colts won that. That's why they have a playoff spot. Or damn, that was an opportunity missed. And now Buffalo has the inside track because of that big time tiebreaker. And it's going to be harder for the Colts to crack that one of the 7 playoff teams where it's deep again. I know last year a lot of quarterbacks got decimated, including obviously the Colts. But I mean, assuming the injury luck for a lot of these teams, like the Bengals, even the Jets, like assuming the injury luck is better, it's going to be brutal. It's going to be absolutely brutal to make the playoffs in the AFC this year. And like I said, every game matters, but I feel like a game like the Bills, it's going to matter here big time. One other thing I want to mention, George, we do have a few predictions I want to read you from some listeners to kind of get your take on, because I think they're interesting, but also I think it sets up expectations. But before we get to those here, second year in a row, Colts have one standalone game. Now, last year, it was just the Germany game, excuse me, that 9:30 against the Patriots. Yep. Then when the schedule came out initially, then obviously we know the Steelers was a Saturday standalone, and the last game of the year was the only primetime game the Colts played. This year, the Colts do have one primetime game, week 11 at the Jets, Sunday Night Football, with some possibilities at the end of the year for the Giants and for the Jaguars to be flexed to maybe Saturday. So we'll see about that. Obviously, a lot of questions, but a lot of excitement, George, about this team. They're young. Anthony Richardson coming back. Are you surprised that the NFL, I don't want to say is not buying the hype, but right now is cautious in the sense of, yeah, the Colts are not going to be a team that people are really interested in. We'll put them on one, national televised game, but that's it. Are you surprised by that?
No, I think a lot of that comes back to the health of the quarterback. I mean, they're trying to be. What I'm surprised is that the one primetime game was week 11. I thought they would get one, but I thought it would be early in the year where there was, percentage wise, a better chance Richardson would be out there. But I think they're at a point now where there's a lot of games that could get flexed. I mean, you talked about those ones at the end, but even some of the other games in there, Buffalo game is one that could
True.
draw enough attention, and people could move them in there. And we'll see how it all plays out. But I think that what you're seeing from the national media is there's a lot of potential with this team. It's a young team that could end up surprising, but then I want a situation where they've got Joe Flacco four times on primetime television this year. Nothing against Joe Flacco, but it's going to be a different audience than a healthy AR if he's playing the way he did. And that's the other part of it. Is that AR remains one of the biggest unknowns in the league. When you talk about the 32 starting quarterbacks, he's right there with the rookies in terms of, yeah, okay, there's all this potential we see in him, and you've seen a little bit last year that encourages you. You really don't have any idea what you're going to get from him on a week to week basis because he really hasn't been able to show that yet. So I think it's just the TV network saying, you know what, we're going to wait, we're going to let this play out. With the flex scheduling, you saw it last year. You can go from very few to ending up having a couple of additional games. I do think, like we talked about, the second half of the schedule is a little bit more open right now on paper. So that might hold them back. I don't know there's as many games there. As a lot of the big matchups you would think are early. Like Pittsburgh
Right.
was an easy one to pick out last year. Hey, that's a national brand. They're going to move that. It's like week 4 now, so it's not
Hmm.
going to probably move. The Bears we mentioned earlier, the Packers. You always look for those kind of. Really, I think the only late season game like that is the Giants that you mentioned earlier, where it's like a national kind of brand team, but we don't know where they're going to be by week
Yeah. If
17.
they're
So
5-10 or 4-11 by that point, I don't think we're getting
yeah,
flex. Hot take.
exactly. Like it does not move. So it's I don't know. The Bills game is one that stands out as a potential, an early flex because that's right around the time they usually start them. That one could happen, but I do think a lot of it is based on look, this team has to prove it. They've got to show the networks that they're going to bring the audience in. If AR is healthy and they're winning, I think they'll quickly become a team that people want to put on TV, especially if they're playing offense as well as they could. If you're looking at Shane Steichen firing on all cylinders and this offense is really a high scoring offense and they're winning games, they're going to be attractive to a lot of networks at that point.
You're 100% right. Even that Detroit game, week 12, could be one
Mhm.
where if the Colts start off kind of closer to your number of 7-5, maybe 7-5 is not a sexy number, but if you have AR playing well and it's Anthony Richardson and this high flying Colts offense taking on the Lions high flying Colts offense, that could absolutely be a flex spot as well. So you're right about that. So one primetime game at the moment. Don't panic and think that's the only time you'll see the Colts not at 1 o'clock. They do have one 4 o'clock game, but otherwise everything else is at 1 o'clock. One thing I
That's a
do
West
like,
Coast game. It's not the 4 o'clock national window.
good call. Good call on that. The one thing I do like, no Thursday game.
Yes, I'm fine
That
with
is
that
one of the
every year.
benefits. Second week or second year in a row, no short week, no. That's another thing too, George, because now you look at the schedule, Thanksgiving, Thursday night, you have Black Friday, you have Christmas, which is a Wednesday. You have teams playing, I think, every day this week or every day this year. The Friday, I know it's beginning of the year, so it's a little different, but Friday in Brazil, I think every day but Tuesday
The
is
Black
having an
Friday
NFL
game.
game. Right. Every game but Tuesday, or every day, excuse me, but Tuesday has a game on it. For the Colts, I think one of the best things in terms of trying to keep Anthony Richardson healthy and on the field is having a normal schedule. And they have a normal schedule each and every week so far. Again, would you want to see him on Monday Night Football to be cool? Absolutely. But at least for the Colts perspective, you have games really until the end of the year. Maybe you get a flex, in sometime in December or January. Otherwise, every Sunday, you can keep a routine. There's no short weeks, no putting guys on the field 3 days after they just played a game. That should help promote, hopefully, along with Anthony Richardson being smarter and learning from last year, help promote him being on the field for hopefully all 17 games.
Yeah, I mean, right now they've got those two games at the end of the year that are TBD, and obviously the flex games. They'll do what they do with those. But right now they've got all Sunday games, and I think all but two of them are 1 o'clock kickoffs.
Yep.
So we'll see what happens. That you would think the Giants are one of those flex games that are TBD right now. You would think that's going to be a 1 o'clock kickoff on a Sunday if things play out the way you would expect them to. Although that's a tough one because like that could get moved to Saturday if they feel like the Colts need a standalone game. Depending on what else is in there. We've seen them take games just because one half of it was interesting to them and they want to show like, hey, look, AR's been playing really well, so put them on Saturday, which you don't know for sure. But yeah, I mean, right now it's what, two games are not scheduled, two games are other than 1 o'clock. So there's 13 1 o'clock kickoffs. Quick
Mm-hmm.
math on Sunday. Like that's as routine as it gets. That's as if you're Shane Steichen, that's probably the thing he's most happy about right now. You can settle in and have that weekly, schedule and keep it. And like I said, don't have short weeks. Don't have a Monday night game. Don't you have one Sunday that you're playing late and one on the West Coast that you're playing at 4:25. That's it. So from that standpoint, it's a really good schedule for the Colts. And it's not a lot of travel. I mean, I think the Denver trip is the only one that might be like out of the Eastern or Central time zone.
Yeah, no, you're right. They don't go to the West Coast at all. Um, and yeah, I think Denver is probably the farthest, like maybe Jacksonville, but yeah, that's also a good point too. It's not strenuous travel. You're not going, across the country or going out of the country like we saw last year when they went to Germany. Like it
Mhm.
is pretty straightforward, which again, hopefully should help promote and just make it more likely that Richardson is healthier, which obviously then should promote that the Colts win more games and get closer to our 11 win expectation. I want to read you, George, a few predictions we got from some listeners here because I think it is interesting. I want to start. I got four here, two good, two bad. Let's start with the bad first and get to the good here. Jason Sanders does write in that we were kind of asking for schedule predictions, record predictions. He said 8-9 this year for the Colts. And what I found interesting was his reasoning was he said last year's 9-8 record was inflated because the Colts played a lot of bad quarterbacks. Sure, like he's right, like they didn't play Joe Burrow. But the Colts didn't have Anthony Richardson for 95% of the year.
Yeah, I mean, that argument I think is very valid, but it does go both ways. I mean, the Colts, I think what's interesting is everybody looks at the offensive side of that, which is absolutely true. They played some weak quarterbacks last year and they missed some of the better ones they were supposed to play. So they got some good injury luck in that regard. But they ended up playing a pretty killer defensive schedule. If you look at like the teams they went up against, they faced some like eight of the top 10 defenses in the league and a couple of them twice. So it was it was a tougher schedule in some ways than it looked like. The offense overperformed against who they were going up against. The defense probably underperformed against who they were going. So that's why I still give some validity to the argument because if those things even out, yeah, 8-9 is reasonable. Plus, like we talked about, there's some tough stretches in here. You don't win those home games in that 6 of 9 stretch. Don't get at least one of them where 6 of 9 are on the road. 8-9 is a real possibility.
This thought never crossed my mind, but I'm curious to hear your opinion. We know what Bill Parcells says, right? You are what your record says you are, but that's not true, right? Like some 11-5 teams, you play some just crap schedules and you get the benefit of, like you said, injury luck. Like not like 11 wins is not 11 wins, depending on what your schedule is. And sometimes, 7 wins. If you have the hardest schedule in the world, you play, it's just, it does vary. Do you look at the Colts last year at 9-8? Do you think that they were inflated? Like, do you think they were truly a 9-8 team, or do you think that they were a worse team that was propped up by, like you said, Joe Burrow, Deshaun Watson missing games and kind of getting the benefit of playing some bad offenses down the stretch?
And it's kind of funny though because you mentioned those and they lost both those games,
Right.
but um, I feel like they overachieved. So at that point, I guess I would have to say it's inflated. Like, but that has much to do with the fact that the starting quarterback was hurt and that you had very young guys in the secondary that got beat up very early in the year. You played like the last 13 games of the year with pretty much rookies, on the outside at cornerback. So that, or even less than that. So I would say, yeah, probably they won more games than they should have. The question is, what do you chalk that up to? And if you chalk it up to the easy schedule, which I think is a valid argument, you can make that case, then it becomes a concern this year. If you chalk it up to Shane Steichen getting these guys to perform above the level that you would think they would, which is sort of where I fall on that spectrum, then you would say that it's something that can be repeated this year. So I don't think 8-9 is a crazy prediction. That's three
Hmm.
games off of what we said. And there are definitely three games that I would flip a coin on in there that I have them winning that I could have going the other way. So I think to me, there's a lot of validity to that argument. But I think whether for me, the whether the cup is half empty or half full question here is, do you put more stock last year's record on the injury luck they had against them, or do you put more stock in Shane Steichen overcoming the injury luck they didn't have on their own side?
Like I would put it honestly more to like when you say overachieve, I'm with you. Like I mean, again, by our win prediction, they doubled what we thought they were going to do. So they absolutely overachieved. But with that said, like I don't like there's not one game I can think of right now that I would call flukish that they won. Like
Mhm.
they're like
Maybe
I guess when you
Baltimore.
look back at last year, like 9-8, right? Like it's they didn't even as a team, right? It's something they were because you see this with turnovers, right? Like usually turnovers, you kind of if you are, plus 30 in the turnover margin, that usually kind of comes back down to earth. You're not going to get as many, and you're probably going to cough more up the next year. It's not like the Colts were like were plus 30 in the turnover differential and like had some anomalies or bad calls go the way we could look at like 3 wins and be like, yeah, they got them, but could you get those 3 wins again next year? Probably not. Like you said before, like I mean, Deshaun Watson didn't play, they lost that game. Joe Burrow didn't play, they lost that game. So you could say, sure, the Colts benefited from some injury luck, but also like they lost those games. So it's not like that win record was inflated because they beat some bad quarterbacks. They lost some of the games they played against, or supposed to play some against the best quarterbacks on the roster or in the league, excuse me, on their schedule last year, and that just didn't unfortunately end up working out because of injuries. Like I would argue, like the flukiest, the one flukiest, the flukiest game. Geez, nailing it here. The flukiest game they played last year, I would argue, is the Browns game, and they lost that one.
It's pretty That one was a
So
pretty
it's
crazy game. I'd say Baltimore just because that game got insane and you went to overtime and you had like that's the one win that probably I would say was fortunate for the Colts. They had some things break their way, but it's canceled out by the Browns game. So it's
right, and they also
they're
made some plays. Like I would agree, they did a good job of shutting down Lamar, and but also at the same time, Gardner Minshew when he had to made some big throws, and
Mhm.
Michael Pittman Jr. made some big catches, and Matt Gay hit some big kicks. Like I guess when I just hear Jason kind of talk about, last year being inflated by bad quarterback play. I guess I never thought of it from that perspective because I've only always looked at it as, well, the Colts didn't have their quarterback for 90% of the year. And so you look at it only from the perspective of they had Gardner Minshew playing and won 9 games. I never kind of really thought about their year overall in terms of going forward, you know, how legit was their record and how much can they carry over into this year. I never really viewed it like as a fluke or just kind of like one of those weird years that they got a lot of breaks their way that normally, will kind of even out this next year. I thought it was a pretty fair 9-8 record that I do think is repeatable and build, able to build upon going forward. That was interesting. I didn't really think about that, and I appreciate your perspective as well and kind of talking about kind of putting in perspective, I guess, kind of last year as well. This is more of a this is more just kind of cracks me up. This next one here from Blake. He he didn't give a didn't give a win-loss prediction. He just said AR will be hurt by week 9. Hasn't completed a whole year in his career.
I mean, facts, right? I mean, no lies detected as far as the last part of that goes.
He's not wrong.
But that's definitely glass half empty. There's no question about that. Um, but I don't know. I don't think he's going to play 17 games. I'll say that.
Okay.
I don't think he's going to play 17. But if he plays 15, are we really going to sit there and say that that was not a good outcome for them? Like if he plays 14 or 15 games, are you really going to say that that's unacceptable? I think you've got to, there's a certain level with these quarterbacks that are a little more physical, that are going to get out there and put themselves on the line. There's a certain level of expectation that they're going to miss a couple games. I think you just see it. I mean, across the league, it's happened to pretty much all of them. Josh Allen has occasionally, I know I'm not sure he's put all 17 together. He's probably the most durable of them, and he's a maniac out there. But how many times has he played hurt too? Like even when he's playing through something. But then look at Lamar, he usually misses a game or two. You just hope that they're not late season games of major consequence, and you hope that Joe Flacco is able to come in and keep things pretty much at a decent level. But I'm not going to sit here right now and say I expect a completely healthy season from Anthony Richardson, but I'm also not going to say he's going to be hurt by week 9. You want to talk about fluky? His injuries last year were kind of fluky, and most of them are. I mean, it. I go back to Paris Campbell. People kept, okay, look, he can't stay on the field. And I kept saying it's really been like things he can't avoid. I mean, if a defender puts his helmet right on your kneecap, basically shatters it, I don't know who's going to survive that. Or they step on your foot in the end zone and break your foot. It's not like they weren't training well enough for this. And he ended up his last year here, he played the whole season. So it just happened to be the worst season and one we'll never really want to remember. But he played the whole year. And so could it happen for AR? Sure. But I think he learned from last year. The one that you probably put on him, first of all, there were only 3 injuries. It's just that they happened in 4 weeks. But you had the knee injury against the Jaguars was nothing. He would have gone back into that game, except that there were only like 10 seconds left, and it was out of reach.
The game was over.
Game, there's no reason in putting him back out there. If that had been a 4-point game, he's back out there trying to score the touchdown. The one in Houston's on him, and he's admitted it. He slowed up going into the end zone, and he got hit, and it led to a concussion. And then the one against Tennessee, to me, is the one that's just kind of a flukish thing. It's a normal football play. Defensive end tracked him down from behind, and he fell on his shoulder in a way that put him out for the year. That's not going to happen. If that same play happens 10 times, that might be the only time that's the outcome of it. So I'm not as concerned. He's physically, he looks bigger to me. We haven't seen him a ton this offseason, but when I've seen him, it looks bigger, which you would think would happen. You keep forgetting he was only 20 years old when he was drafted. He played last year at 21. So he's going to be 22 here in a couple of weeks, or maybe he just turned 22. It's sometime this month, I'm pretty sure, that he turns 22. He's still growing into his adult body. Like, let's not forget that. And it does look like that process is taking a little bit, some steps this offseason, but also he's been around the league. He understands some things he didn't understand last year. I know he didn't play a ton in the regular season, but he was on the sideline. He was in every meeting. I think he learned some things to protect himself. So I'm not saying he's going to play 17, but I think that he's going to be injured by week 9 is overly pessimistic.
I'm not going to put a number on like what I would be happy with in terms of games played. I'll phrase it like this, because to your point, like you look at last year, Aaron Rodgers, Joe Burrow, now not last year, but previous years with Lamar Jackson getting hurt.
Mhm.
All of those guys got hurt and were out just doing normal quarterback things. Right? Like
Yep.
there's nothing they could have done differently to prevent themselves from getting hurt. Outside of, like you said, Anthony Richardson running through the end zone, not slowing up, there's nothing he could have done to prevent himself from getting hurt. Now, I hope he does slide a little bit more and run out of bounds a little bit more. We didn't really get to see that because the sample size was so small. But as long as he's smart and not like Josh Allen, because Josh Allen is somehow the anomaly. This dude throws his body around and he's Teflon. He doesn't get hurt. I don't get it. He puts himself in horrible situations and somehow, plays every game. He plays hurt. You're right, but plays every game. Take him out of it. Like, if you're like Jalen Hurts, where you run the ball, but also, he's been banged up, but he's not missed games. Like, if AR is smart and gets hurt, I can't be upset about it. Like Joe Burrow twice in his career, 4 years, has gotten hurt out for the year. Torn ACL and then the wrist thing last year. Bengals fans can't be upset and being like, oh, Joe Burrow's got to protect himself better. He didn't do any, like, it does. It's a physical sport and it does happen. As long as Anthony Richardson is taking care of his body, I'm not like, if he gets hurt in week 10, sure, it'd be frustrating, be annoying, but like, if it's one of those things where it's just like it's a football play, you almost got to live with it. So it's like
life in the NFL, yeah.
Right. I hope he's bigger. And in terms of stronger, which can help some of the wear and tear. It sounds like listening to Cam Turner, he's speaking on the Colts podcast, I believe it was on Wednesday. With watching AR throwing, that he has no hesitation, and so far, like, he's seemingly all the way back, which is great to hear that that shoulder is healing really well. So hopefully there should be no limitations this year in terms of him, throwing the deep ball again. As long as he's smart, I'll live with the results. Kind of like if he gets hurt, I'll live with it if he's playing smart, like we think and hope he can. But I'm with you. Yeah, the can't stay healthy for his entire career. Technically, you're technically you're right,
He
but
hasn't done
nothing
it.
nothing I love more than taking 1 year and just extrapolating it out. That's who he is. Injury prone. Forget his one
Well,
year
and
in
it may
Florida
happen
where
in
he was
Florida
healthy.
too. Like it happened in Florida too. He didn't play a full year at Florida either. So I'm sure that that's part of what they're going into. But that's there's a lot of things that are going on in that situation because he had a short sample size there too. So some of that wasn't injuries. It was just there were other guys that they wanted to play. But he has not yet played a full season, every game for his team. Um, and I don't think Jalen Hurts has either as a pro. I don't think he's played every game yet. I know he got benched a couple times because the game didn't matter, and obviously started out his career behind Carson Wentz, but he's missed 1 or 2 games because of injury. Because that's if you're gonna be as physical as some of these quarterbacks are, it's almost inevitable. CJ Stroud got hurt last year too.
He did got concussion, and missed at least 2 games, maybe
Yeah.
3. It's a physical sport, like you said. Now more than ever, like these dudes are bigger, faster, stronger. The collision rates are harder than they've ever been. You just hope that the injury luck, like you said, kind of breaks the Colts' way this year when it didn't last year, and AR could be out there for, we'll say, 80%, bare minimum, of the
Yeah.
games here in 2024. Two other predictions I want to run by you here, George. I think this is interesting. Brodo Bangans says 11-6 for this year if the Colts are healthy. He's with us. Sir Bobby
Obviously
the
that
Knight,
changes.
obvious, great minds think alike. Sir Bobby the Knight, same thing. He goes 10-7. So right around the 10-11 win range. What I want to ask you is this, because we're both at 11-6. So you had the Vegas win totals come out earlier this week. They had the Colts at 8.5.
Mhm.
So, I mean, we're looking at, that's a 3-win difference. Me, you, and even we'll say Sir Bobby the Knight there in terms of at least 2 to 3 wins over what Vegas is saying. Are we right now, George, are we overrating the Colts? Or maybe is Vegas underrating this team and maybe taking Anthony Richardson's health too much into question?
I mean, last year they were definitely underrating the team, and so were we. So we'll see how it turns out this year. I think, I think it goes back to what you're talking about. I think it's the same as the primetime game. I think it's Vegas looking at Anthony Richardson and not just the health, but just the unknown. I mean, even if he did play all 17 games this year, you can't absolutely guarantee he's going to be a Pro Bowl level quarterback. You just don't know yet. We haven't seen enough of it. It could be rocky. That's one of the realistic outcomes for this season. But I think most people this time of year, obviously not the one prediction you got, but most people this time of year, hope springs eternal all spring, right? I mean, you feel like the upside. You're looking at what this could be, what potentially could go right. So yeah, we probably are on the high end a little bit, but I think that's where you should be this time of year. That's what fun is it to sit there and try to come up with every reason why this year's going to fail. Talk to my daughter about this the other day because you're trying to get her out of that mindset of, you know, expecting bad outcomes. And then you just kind of start, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I told her, using a sports analogy, there's 32 teams in the NFL. So if I say the Colts aren't going to win the Super Bowl, I'm probably going to be right. I'm probably going to win that prediction. It's a lot easier to talk down one of these teams than it is to say, that's the one. That's the one that's going to do it. And the same thing, like even you're talking about playoffs, more teams miss the playoffs than make the playoffs. So it's still, you know, to me at this time of year, not only is there no fun in trying to look at the downside, it's the coward's way out. It's the easy way out. If I'm going to sit there and say this team's going to flop, well, I'm probably going to end on the right side of that because you can defend that however you want to as well. If we say 11-6 and somebody's against us saying they're going to flop and they finish 10-7, well, they didn't meet our expectations. It was a flop.
No, you're absolutely right about that. And I'm glad you bring that up. I'm definitely more of an optimist and glass half full kind of guy. And so it sounds like you are too, which I love that. Right. That's the way life should be. Why be down? Like you said, be negative all the time. That's no way to live life. We only got one life. People remember that. Don't want to be, be the curmudgeon in the room. Don't be that person. But I do like you're right. Like now is the time to be optimistic. I think though there is like to your point, there is a path where you could say the Colts can win 11 games. Is it realistic though? I think that's also like you got to balance optimism versus reality. And at least for me, George, like again, maybe this is just the optimist and the bias in me as a Colts fan talking here, but I feel like I am looking at this pretty objectively. Like I do think we're both being optimistic but realistic when it comes to saying the Colts should go 11-6 this year. Like we're not sitting here telling you they're beating the Dolphins, the Lions, the Bills. We're not sitting here telling you they're going to sweep the Texans or sweep the Jaguars. Like I do like there is challenges on this schedule, absolutely.
Mhm.
But I think with what we saw in the small sample size we have of Anthony Richardson, and one thing we can't predict is health. That's where I'll say I'll be 100% optimistic, and maybe it's not realistic, but I'm going to be optimistic in terms of Anthony Richardson plays most of this year. And so, assuming that is to be the case, like I think we've seen enough last year to be like, okay, him in this offense with Shane Steichen, now you add AD Mitchell and really essentially add Jonathan Taylor with now AR. Like that is going to be an offense that's going to be really hard to slow down and should be very consistent. And if Chris Ballard is right in terms of this secondary, even just growing a little bit and this pass rush becoming more consistent as well in 2024, like the Colts, nothing, they didn't make obviously sweeping changes, right? Clearly, they brought back most of the roster, but I think they made enough adjustments to improve a little bit here, a little bit there. And when you win 9 games, like I don't think it's like, I think it is very realistic to look at this team
Mhm.
last year and say, last year wasn't a fluke. They improved from last year to this year. And like 2 wins going from 9 to 11 wins, I don't think is like unrealistic. I don't think it's pie in the sky. I feel like it is pretty realistic here, George. And I think honestly, Vegas is the one that's maybe underrating the Colts right now in terms of putting their win-loss number at 8.5.
I mean, I'll tell you is AR and Jonathan Taylor played 2 snaps together last year. So if thinking that them playing more than 2 snaps could increase this team by 2 wins, that's realistic. I don't think that's a crazy way to look at things. And we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of question marks. Can AD Mitchell come in and be an impact guy and improve that receiving core? Can Latu come in and be that pass rusher, right away? It's tough. When you're young, that's probably one of the positions that takes the longest to come around. But can he come in and affect quarterbacks? And even if he's not getting the numbers himself, open things up for DeForest Buckner, open things up for Quiddy Pay, be a part of that rotation, get them to that 8-man front that they want, where they can, as Ed Dodd said the other day, hockey line shift here and bring out four and
Yeah.
bring 4 more on. If they can do that because Latu's here, that can be a major impact, no matter what his numbers are. So, can the improvement come? I think so. You, to me, it's very much, and that's what this year is about. You want to look at it, there, it's realistic either way. If you want to look at it and say AR is going to be mostly healthy, the offense has a chance with him and Jonathan Taylor and these receivers to be really difficult to stop, then 11 wins is realistic. If you want to say AR is going to be hurt and the secondary is going to be a problem again for a second straight year, then 8 or less is realistic. So I think Vegas is kind of splitting that difference and saying, well, we don't know which way it'll go. And we'll drop right at 8.5. So we're basically asking you, are they going to have a winning season or a losing season? I mean, that to me is the 50-50 split, out in the desert.
No, you're right about that. Last thing we'll mention here before we do get out of here, George. We talked about the schedule. We have not talked about the schedule release video, which now has really become its own cottage industry, if you will, with all these teams and the creativity. Titans ran back last year the great schedule release video they did of asking people on the street in Nashville identify these teams, which is very funny. Check that out. But the Colts, I thought, George, I know it's more of a recent phenomena in terms of kind of making these videos and kind of getting super creative. I loved what the Colts did. Going to an elementary school, Shane Steichen's there, Anthony Richardson's there, Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner, drawing the logos for the 17 teams they're going to play. I thought that was really well done. And you noticed something too that you thought like you really appreciated. What was that?
I think it's a continuation of Shane Steichen this offseason, right? We've seen him coming out of his shell. We've seen him be a little bit more, I don't know, his personality's coming out a little bit more. Still all ball. That's never going to change. And it's in the video, you'll see a very all ball version of Shane Steichen. But I think you're starting to see his personality a little bit more. You see him actually smile this offseason a few times, and he smiles in the video. Uh, it's, I think it's good in year two. We always talk about growth. I think you're seeing him be more comfortable. Now, granted, give the guy a break. Last year, he came in relatively late in the process. He was coming into a situation that I kept terming a circus, and he had a lot of work to do. And he should feel better this year because he did a lot of things right in that year. And you can just see he's a little bit more comfortable on the job. He's a little bit more comfortable in his own skin. And I think it's fun to see some of Shane Steichen's personality start to seek out here, and we can learn a little bit more about who he is beyond just a guy who's kind of a mad scientist, drawing up plays.
In the role he played in the video of substitute teacher, it really kind of he gave off like Michael Scott meets Leslie Knope. If they got together and had a child, that's how like Shane Steichen was in that video. It was like you said, a lot of fun to see, and hopefully too that means like you said, being more comfortable now in year two, kind of getting your bearings, having everything settled down. Hopefully that also means now that you're kind of more comfortable and a lot of the things, the groundwork's already laid, that means you can be more creative, right? Like you can spend more time on schemes and game plans and putting AR and AD Mitchell and Michael Pittman Jr. and Jonathan Taylor in better positions to succeed. Kind of think like when you have more time to think about that stuff, hopefully, it provides new wrinkles. We saw him last year. He was not shy about adding new wrinkles and trying to catch teams off guard and trying to have them panic. So now, I mean, hopefully, like you said, with everything kind of settling down, maybe that means even a more creative offense that we saw last year.
I think so. I don't know that he got enough national attention last year, honestly.
No.
I say that, again, through the lens of this is the team I cover. This is the one I watch all year long. So I'm always going to feel like somebody's underrated. And I'm constantly beating the drum for Grover Stewart, who is also a star in the video. But the job he did with all the injuries that were around him, and with the black cloud that was hanging over the franchise. You go back to this time last year, there's a reason two optimistic people were not optimistic going into this season. And he turned all of that around in the span of one season. And I just don't feel like, I think people should be talking about him the way they were Dan Campbell after his first year in Detroit. That's the way I feel right now. I feel like he had that kind of an impact. I think Campbell got a lot more attention because Detroit had been bad for 3 decades. And they were coming into a really bad situation as well. But people talked about the life that he brought into that franchise, the energy that he brought. Obviously, Dan Campbell's personality was a lot more out there right away, which helps you get that recognition too. But I think without the biting of kneecaps, Shane did a lot of the same things in Indy. It was just more of a low key approach. And I think every time we've had somebody on, during the year last year and during the offseason, who's more of either a league wide view or, with their team, I usually have asked them, what do you think of the job Shane Steichen did? And every time, incredibly impressive. This guy is, the real deal. And I think, to me, he and Dan Campbell share a lot in common. And it'll be interesting to see how, if he can obviously take the growth in year two and year three that Dan Campbell did, then Colts fans are going to really enjoy this run.
It was criminal. Absolutely criminal last year. He was not a coach of the year finalist. Didn't think he deserved to win. Thought D'Amico Ryans had a better case. Kevin Stefanski, I'm pretty sure, won the award, which I think he had a great case for as well. Look, you could say Dan Campbell and Kyle Shanahan, should have been finalists. People expected the Lions to be good last year. People expected the 49ers to be good last year. I don't know why you're getting recognition for basically doing what you're supposed to do. I get the Lions haven't won in a long time, but no one was sitting there at the Lions thinking, oh, yeah, they're going to win 5 games last year.
No.
Everyone predicted them to win the division, and they did.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, I'm with you. And it's a good point about in terms of like the pizzazz. Shane is very low key. He does not say anything that gets picked up outside of indie media. He's very all business, not no personality, but just doesn't want to give anything away. Doesn't want to say any zany quotes. He's not Mike McDaniel over there, just having a good time. And that, I think, to your point, does maybe not put him on as many people's radars as it should. he easily, in terms of having 5 candidates last year, easily did one of the 5 best coaching jobs in the
Mhm.
NFL last year. Absolutely criminal that he was not a coach of the year finals. But I think it's safe to say, like you said, but maybe now people taking a step back and looking like, wow, yeah, what he took over, what he endured before and during the season, and still be in a spot to win the division last year, last game of the season. It seems like now he is on more people's radars in year 2. And assuming if they can go 11-6, like we are predicting, we should hear a lot more Shane Steichen's name and a lot more praise, finally, deservingly so, going his way. All right. So the Colts schedule is out. George and I, without talking, this is par for the course here. Both have the Colts 11-6. What is your record prediction for the Colts now that we know not only who they're playing, we knew that for a while, but now when they are playing these teams? If you're watching on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod is where you can watch this video. Drop it in the comments. Give George and I your record prediction, maybe a little 1 or 2 sentence explanation as well. If you're listening to the pod, wherever you get your pods, Blue Horseshoe Pod, either go to our YouTube page, type it in there, or tweet us. GM Bremer is where you can find George on Twitter. Ryan_Hickey and the number 3 where you can find me here. Want to hear your predictions, as George and I both believe, and also we never said this, but I'm going to assume so, George. 11-6 is playoffs, right?
Oh yeah,
Okay, just
yeah.
making sure. We've seen,
Pretty much
11-5
historically.
teams sweat it out before.
Mhm. It could be one of those years. I think it's going to be interesting because, like you said, this is a deep AFC crop. That hasn't changed. Nothing there has changed this year. It's a very deep crop. It should be a fun season.
Very fun season. Give us your predictions. We gave you yours. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll talk to you next week right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.